Okay, great. Good morning, all. I hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for joining us for Track 5 of the Health Equity and Social Justice Conference for 2020. This is our 13th conference, but our first virtual conference. So I appreciate your patience as we figure this out together. So thank you so much for being here. We're really excited about today's session. So we are going to have our skill building workshop called Activating the A in the Active Bystander Intervention. And our presenters today are Katrina Wagner, Health Promotion Coordinator with DePaul University, and Christine Augustin, the Student Activity Coordinator at DePaul University. A couple of quick reminders. If you would please keep your microphone off during the presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to enter those in the chat, and I will make sure that those get to the presenters at the end of the presentation. But feel free to ask throughout, or if you have any questions or concerns, please just go ahead and post those in the chat and I'll be monitoring for you. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Katrina and Christine.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks everyone so much for joining us this morning. Happy Friday. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Okay. And so thank you for that lovely introduction. Yes, I am Katrina Wagner, she, hers pronouns, and I'm the Health Promotion Coordinator within Health Promotion and Wellness at DePaul University.
Hi everyone, happy Friday. My name is Christine Augustin, and I am the grad assistant from the Office of Health Promotion and Wellness, and I'm super excited just to learn with you all and educate as well.
All right, so our office provides services and supports for all students at DePaul University. And we aim to empower our students to seek help, to take care of themselves in holistic ways, and provide what we call this take care DePaul culture. So taking care of ourselves, taking care of each other, and taking care DePaul. And so this workshop is part of that. It's a way to activate, as you know, bystanders in our title around all health and wellness topics, but specifically today we'll be talking about sexual and relationship violence, mental health and well-being, and substances. And so before we get started and kind of dive into content, we really like to make sure that, you know, folks feel comfortable. We know that a lot of these topics are very personal to us. Sometimes we've had history, sometimes traumatic history with some of these topics. And so we want to encourage you to take care of yourself in whatever ways that you need to, but also kind of, you know, looking at these, trying to challenge yourself with some of these things that might be uncomfortable, and maybe why is it uncomfortable if it has nothing to do with, you know, some previous history or trauma or things that we're going through, and really stepping up, you know, when you need to. We have some interactive parts, so we hope to get some of y'all talking in the chat or unmuting yourselves if you feel comfortable, showing up fully and just being present here. I know that there's a lot going in the world right now, right? With regards, of course, to the election, to the pandemic, to the racism pandemic. There's just so much just going on in our lives, personally, locally, nationally. So we really appreciate your time and attention today. And then keeping in mind that well, we are recording this session for educational purposes, but then just encouraging each other to respect one another, using I statements, embracing our differences, and just really working hard to challenge our own biases. So we're going to be diving into the content, but if you have anything else you feel like should be added to these community guidelines, feel free to unmute yourself or take a moment to drop them in the chat. We really welcome you all and want you to all feel like this is a comfortable learning space. All right. So I don't see anything, but feel free to share in the chat if you'd like, but we're gonna move on since I know we have a bit of a tight schedule and we're really excited to get into the content today.
Yeah, Yeah, so here at HPW, we have this model called the 3-2-1 model, and this really supports the Take Care DePaul message. So we all want you to virtually walk out this workshop with some skills and some strategies on how to take care of yourself, but also how to take care of your community. So the first thing, and this is, we definitely encourage you to write any notes if you find that it's helpful. But the first thing we want you to walk out here is just with 3 facts about bystander intervention. So we will be, there will be a lot of facts about bystander intervention, racial disparities when it comes to support, and then also 2 things, two active bystander intervention strategies that you hope to use or that you want to enhance on using. And then 1 resource that maybe you want to use or utilize or even share with someone. So keep in mind, feel free to take a picture, take a screenshot, or even write it down. We definitely want you to walk out feeling like you're actually activating that active bystander intervention. So here's our agenda for what we're going to be talking about today. So the first thing is to help you understand the importance of bystander intervention and talk a little bit about some barriers. So one barrier is just like the diffusion of responsibility. The next thing we will be talking about is to help you understand how a bystander can contribute to equity and how it can also improve help-seeking behaviors. And then lastly, some tangible skills. So giving you and providing you some skills that you can use as an active bystander. And this includes many things such as active listening, support, and even referral skills. So we will be talking about the 5 Ds by the Hollaback organization, but also Katrina will be talking about the Algae action plan, which is it's such a great skill to use. And then at the end, which is my favorite part, is that we are going to do some skill applications. So we'll have scenarios where you can use these skills and you can also share the scenarios as well. Does anyone have any questions before we go? You feel free to again say it in the chat. But yes. All right, thank you so much for your comments. All right, we can move on to the next slide. All right. So for this moment, we want you to let's sit and pause and just reflect and think about a time where you were in distress or a time where you needed help. Think about what happened, whether you can write this down or even just think about it, but what happened? Who was there? Did you receive that help? Did you receive any support? What type of support did you receive if you did? What do you wish had happened? And then why do you think someone helped or did not help? So we're going to give you about like 2 minutes to ponder on these questions. And while you're thinking, I have an example, something that I will always remember, but a time where I needed help was when I was really stressed out for a biology exam. It sounds really simple, but I really was just struggling and determining, like, what should I do? I had to cram, but I still needed support from classmates, and I was just stressed out. Who was there? It was just me in my dorm. And I didn't receive help, and that's because I didn't ask. I did have a roommate, but I didn't like ask my roommate for assistance. And I wish that my roommate did say like, hey, like I noticed that, you know, you seem really stressed out. And that's something that I wish there was a time that I called for help. But I know that there are times where, you know, there are some barriers when we ask for help that may hinder us from asking for help. But then there were times where I've had, you know, active bystanders, and we just hope that during this reflection that you really just think about a time where you needed help so that you're able to open up to this skill-based workshop. Katrina, do you have an example?
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing, Christine. And I just want to, you know, point out just, you know, there's lots of, like you said, barriers to reaching out for help. And even, you know, sometimes based on our own identity, we don't want to reach out for help, right? Like I know just being, you know, Asian American, we don't really reach out for help. It's not really in our culture to like show our weaknesses, right? And so I want folks to think a little bit about that. So a lot of times we put the onus on like the person needing help, that they need to actively reach out, right? So thinking about some of those barriers, but then again, like what are the barriers for the people around us? Like, are they not noticing the signs, right? And so we're gonna go through some of the smaller signs and even some larger signs. My own story, I have like kind of the quintessential bystander intervention situation that you'll hear about, or, you know, there's lots of images around, but I had a bike accident now a year ago. And now every time I ride my bike, my sister thinks I'm getting into an accident because it wasn't like a big deal or anything, but I had been riding my bike to work and I don't know what happened. Like I just kind of like blanked out, I think. And I was approaching a stop sign, and I didn't stop fast enough, obviously, but there was a car that just kind of like swerved into the turning lane, and I like tapped him. I didn't really like, you know, I wasn't going super fast. And so I tapped his bumper, and the gentleman kind of walked out and looked at me, looked up and down at me, looked at his car, and then just got back in their car, didn't say a word to me. And in my head, I was just like, oh my God, do I have bike insurance? Is that a thing? Like, I can't pay for this. Like, I was just like freaking out and not even like realizing like, oh, am I injured? Is the car, like, what's going on? Is the person in the car okay? I was just like freaking out about like, you know, just like, is there something that I should be doing or shouldn't have done, you know? And it actually didn't occur to me to ask somebody for help, but the cars around me, like, nobody stopped. Like there was people walking, there was, you know, lots of cars because it was rush hour, but nobody stopped to ask me. And I kind of like pulled over, just like took a few breaths and then went on to work. But I was so shaken up that I did ride my bike for probably a month. I started to walk to work because I was just like really, you know, it was a bit of a traumatic event for me. So yeah, I mean, that's my story. I'm sure other folks have some stories, and I would love to hear if somebody's willing to share.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, I had a work situation that I was asked to work on a project that was out of my skill set and expertise. And so I did reach out to help, and that person was so busy that they really couldn't help. And the expectation from my workplace was that, you know, that I had to do this. And so it was really stressing me out. So I took some online courses, and I reached out to other colleagues across the country and put things together, and then sent it to the to the person that had the expertise. And it wasn't personal that I wasn't getting help, but the process was, I think, the expectations that I had for myself, that I had to come up with this, and that the expectations from people around me that, you know, I had an expertise that I don't have. And so understanding my own limits for both legality reasons and also for safety reasons. But I do think reaching out to others and taking courses and really understanding the limits and boundaries of what I can do sort of helped me work through it. But it was a really stressful process.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Rebecca. And I think your story is something that we can all really identify with, especially as we're taking on a lot more work, right? And I'm just curious, what, kind of reflecting on your story, what do you hope would have happened? Like, if somebody would have offered help or intervened, like what would that have looked like, do you think?
I think that that there would be more collaboration, and that they would be really kind of coming up with the content because it was medical, and that I would sort of, you know, help with getting that formatted and maybe making changes appropriate to our situations. But and I think the stress was really just that medical knowledge was really, you know, had to come from someone obvious with more experience. So
yeah, thanks for sharing. So it sounds like, you know, you're not opposed to it, but, you know, we talk a lot about boundaries too. You want to know where your boundaries are, right? And it sounds like that wasn't clearly drawn either.
Right.
Thank you for sharing. Does anybody else have a situation or a story they'd like to share? All right, I'll take your silence as a no. I'll let you off the hook now, but don't worry, we will have lots of opportunities to chat it up coming up. But let's move on and just learn a little bit more about Bystander, right? So I think it's probably something that many of you have heard about, maybe something that a lot of you know a little bit more about, but just to kind of give everyone a ground level and kind of be on the same page. We'll just talk a little bit more about the definition. So from Latane and Darley, they say that it's the idea that individuals are more likely to help when alone than when in the company of others. So you see this graphic where they're saying, oh, that person probably doesn't need any help. Oh, they're okay. Oh, somebody else will help, right? Oh, they're probably just drunk, right? So what are those assumptions and those biases we make, right? And so the more people that are around, the less likely somebody is to help a victim. And so it can be hard to tease out the many reasons people fail to take action, but I'm sure some of us can think of reasons why not that are quite common. You know, sometimes like time, right? Sometimes safety is a big reason, right? We don't want to get involved in a situation and put ourselves at risk. Uncertainty, like we don't know what's going on, right? We don't want to get involved, or we don't know what to do, or we don't know how to help, right? So research says that we're more likely to help when we actually know what to do. And that's why, you know, people who are in positions of like a paramedic, a doctor, a nurse, they're kind of used to activating and kind of reacting, especially in emergent situations. So research says those kind of folks are a little bit more apt to help in a situation of a crisis. But we're going to learn some skills and strategies so you feel a little bit more prepared to intervene in a type of situation today. And so another thing that goes hand in hand with bystander effect is this diffusion of responsibility. And you saw it in that picture before, but it's really this tendency to divide the personal responsibility by the number of helpers. And so diffusion is one reason some don't respond. The second reason is the need to behave in correct and socially acceptable ways. So it's more likely, like, think about a situation where, particularly college students, where, you know, you're in a group with peers. It's most likely that you're not going to step up, especially around, like, you know, people your own age who are kind of in a group and you're just like doing what's socially acceptable for you, right? It's not cool per se to like step out and do your own thing, right? We're gonna fit in and be liked and be accepted, right? And so stepping out might not align with those kinds of things. And so when other observers fail to react, individuals often take this as a signal that a response is not needed or not appropriate. So, you know, nobody else is responding, so maybe it's just me, like maybe this person really doesn't need help, right? And so all of those kinds of thoughts go into our head. Research shows that when bystanders were alone, 75% helped when they thought a person was in trouble. But when a group of 6 people were together, only 31% helped. So the more people around, the less likely we are to help. And according to the US Department of Justice, a bystander is present at 70% of assaults and about 52% of robberies. But the percentage of people who help a victim varies widely by the type of crime, the environment, the situation, and some other key variables. And so to think of this, I want you to think about this very, very famous case. Some of you may have heard of it. It's kind of the ideal case that we use when we talk about sexual and relationship violence and bystander intervention. And so this is the most frequently cited example of the bystander effect in psychology. So the legend of Kitty Genovese is the brutal murder of a young woman on March 13th, 1964, was about 28 years old, and Genovese was returning home from work. As she approached her apartment entrance, she was attacked and stabbed by a man later identified as Winston Mosley. Despite her repeated calls for help, so the victim was actually asking for help. You know, sometimes we've been talking about what if we don't know that somebody needs help? Well, this person was saying, I need help. But none of the dozen or so people in the nearby apartment buildings who heard her cries called the police or reported the incident. The attack first began at about 3:20 a.m., but it wasn't until 3:50 a.m. that someone first contacted the police. So that's 30 minutes, 30 minutes. That's a long time for the folks around there to be thinking like, oh, am I gonna react? Am I not gonna help? Like, this went on for 30 minutes and nobody helped. So researchers have found that onlookers are less likely to intervene if the situation is ambiguous. So in this case, the 38 witnesses reported that they thought that they were witnessing a lover's quarrel and didn't realize that the young woman was actually being murdered. So in this situation, like, a crisis is happening, and sometimes, like, right, we're unsure what's happening. We don't want to get involved. We say, like, it's their business. Like, how often do we say that, right? And so onlookers might wonder exactly what is happening during such moments, and people often look to others in the group to respond. And so none of these 38 were responding, and so they were like, nope, nothing's wrong, right?
Now we're gonna talk a little bit more about the racial and social disparities when it comes to bystander intervention. And so this was a study that was held in 2016, and the researchers wanted to really just examine, like the racial and social disparities when it comes to medical emergencies in the US. And so we have here that they concluded that there were bystanders that provided help to the patients, but there was only 1 in 39 patients that actually received that bystander support. And even looking at the percentage, it's 2.57% that actually like received bystander support. And also we see that there are Black patients that were less likely to receive support. And they noticed that patients who were in the most disadvantaged countries were less likely to actually receive that. So you see that there is a disparity when it comes to race, and that's something that you notice throughout research continuously, that race definitely plays a role. And as the researcher Cornwell says, that there is a huge racial disparity in terms of who gets support from public emergencies. The next study we have, and this was in 2010, and it was to examine the role of racial attitudes when it comes to bystander intervention. So looking at the race of the victim and looking at help-seeking behaviors. So this study included 43 white female college students. They were either alone or in face-to-face with the non-responsive bystanders. And it examined to see like what race would receive the most support or bystander support. And so the researchers hypothesized that the white bystanders would conform to more of like the pressures that's going on and not intervene for Black victims. And the results definitely supports their hypothesis. So they found that when a bystander was the only witness, so when they were alone, Black victims were helped as frequently as white victims. However, when bystanders were together, so in public, and there were other like passive witnesses, they were more likely to help the white victim versus the Black victim. So as you see here from these two studies that I talked about, there is some disparities when it comes to race. And moving to the next slide, you also will see looking at the statistics when it comes to online violence, right? Because not only that there's like public things going on, but there is such thing as online violence. And we see here that marginalized communities receive higher rates of online harassment and different forms of violence. And so I'll just read a couple. So 48% of the LGBTQ community experience online harassment. 42% of African Americans experience online harassment because of their race. And you see an increase with religion and faith-based harassment. And then 90% of women reported experience revenge porn. And this is definitely recent. And even looking at 2017, there is still high rates when it comes to Blacks and Hispanics, and they're more likely to be harassed online because of their race or ethnicity. And so these statistics, just show that when it comes to violence and different forms of violence, oppression does play a role in that, and it may increase the rates. And so one thing about being an active bystander that I truly value is that it's one thing to act, but it's also another thing to learn, right? And to reflect on your biases, reflect on your barriers when it comes to your identity. So it's important we want you to also, reflect on like, wow, and be able to, learn some of this information, because this will also help you to motivate you to actually activate that A in active bystander intervention. Are there any questions or any thoughts and comments? Again, feel free to type in the chat. We definitely want this to be interaction. I have a question from Rebecca. What is revenge porn? It's a great question. So revenge porn, and what it's referring to is when you let's say there is a male identified individual and a female and identified individual, and let's say the woman sent pictures, and the man would use these pictures to blackmail the woman. So it's using it in revenge, using the person's pictures without their permission or their consent, and maybe posting it on a website or posting it on their social media platform, and using it as a weapon. Is that cleared up? That was a good question. Any other questions? Any comments? Was it surprising?
You know, I think our last slide kind of shows how much room as a society and as a culture we have to grow, right, in terms of our anti-racism and our activation. When we see that folks are more likely to help white identified people when there's more people around, but not for Black folks, right?
I don't see any questions, but yeah, can move on to the next one.
Well, thanks, Christine, for sharing that. And so I hope that you've seen this in the past few months as we, work through this pandemic of racism. And so in a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist, right? We must be actively anti-racist and understanding our own identities and breaking down our own biases. And these are things that just culture and society has taught us. It doesn't make us a good or a bad person. It just means that we have some work to do. Whether we identify as Asian, as Black, as white, Hispanic, we all have privilege, right? And I think that the most recent months have really shown us that it's so deeply rooted into these systems in the United States, within our own system of, where we are in a department, where we are in DePaul, where we are in our neighborhoods and communities, right? I think we can think about the segregation that takes place in Chicago, right? And how even the transit system helps that, right? Like when we look at transit towards the South Side or the West Side, it's not as great, right, as it is for the more affluent North Side neighborhoods, right? And so how does that help or hurt people get access to care, or, anybody being able to or want to help them, right? And so if we're in a neighborhood that's differing from us and somebody needs help, are we more likely to or less likely to, right? All right, and so finding statistics on bystander intervention is actually really tough, I'll say. Like some of our studies you'll notice aren't the most recent, but I do think that they still hold merit and hold truth, right? And so I found one that's about 1 in 7 people are likely to intervene, which is not great, not a great number, right? But it really starts with us, and it starts with unpacking those biases and understanding ourselves and understanding some of the other ways that we can help, right? And so some of our models will show you that you don't have to always be the one, aiding and getting the help and doing all of that stuff, right? Like you can have help, there's a variety of ways that you can provide support. And sometimes it's not like a major crisis or incident. Sometimes it's something that's, maybe seen as a little bit smaller, like, some of the stories that were shared by Christine and Rebecca in the beginning, things that happen on a daily basis. So we have opportunities every single day to step in and support people and provide help. And like we say in HPW, get them the resources and the help they need. That's really a large part of what we do. And so we want to help you have those skills as well. And so typically, being an active bystander does not mean that you should, we don't want you to risk your personal safety, your health and well-being, and we don't want you to think that you need to become this, vigilante, but there are a range of actions that can be helpful depending on you and the risky situation at hand. So remember, if you're ever worried for the immediate safety of yourself or others, you can decide to leave, call for help if that's, if you feel like that's going to help people. And that is still being a bystander, right? You don't have to jump right in. But typically when we see something happen, we think about these main things. So we notice the situation, right? So we're assessing, this is a crisis, this isn't a crisis. Somebody needs help, somebody doesn't need help, right? And then we say, think in our head, interpret the situation as requiring intervention. Should I help? Do I need help? Like even Rebecca's situation of offering help. Maybe her colleagues and people around her were like, should I intervene? And then somebody might be like, well, I have a lot on my plate. I don't have enough, right? So those are kind of the thoughts that go through our head sometimes. And so then we go through assuming responsibility for intervening. Well, if I intervene, I have to do this, 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 and this, right? So we think that we have to like take control of everything and rescue the person, right? That's not always the case, right? And then we think about, do we know how to effectively help, right? So we're going to be more likely and going to be more confident in intervening if we know what to do, right? If we know the resources, but we don't know everything, right? So I say when I meet with students, like, we talk about things and I point them in the direction of a variety of resources because I don't have all of the answers, right? And so there's experts in a variety of fields. So let's use all of those experts and all of those support systems. And so all of these 4 things like really lead into the actual, am I gonna intervene? Am I gonna step in? Am I gonna help? And so this kind of gives you a little bit of a framework for, when we're thinking about why somebody doesn't help, why somebody does help. And so we got some tips, and don't you worry, we will provide you some more tangible models, but this is just for right now to take a moment to think a little bit loosely about these frameworks. And so, we recommend approaching everyone as a friend. Like, how would you treat a friend, right? Be kind. You say, hey, what's going on? How are you, right? So we don't forget those things. If you're a stranger, introducing yourself, right? If you have skills, saying, hey, I'm Katrina, I'm a mental health first aider. So that's what I teach my mental health first aid attendees. And then is honest and direct whenever possible, right? So oftentimes in a crisis, like things are happening. Somebody's we might have like high racing blood pressure. We might be, in that hyper arousal state, fight, flight, freeze, right? A lot of things are going on. Maybe there's danger oncoming. There's lots of people. Maybe there's kids around, right? So who else is there? And so it's best to speak honestly and directly and saying, hey, I'm Katrina, I'm a mental health first aider. Do you need help, right? So asking like yes or no questions is really helpful because sometimes the person that needs help, it's difficult for them to kind of put together words or they're not sure, right? So sometimes yes or no questions are helpful, and then sometimes there's language barriers, right? So having somebody who's able to nod yes or no can be helpful too. And trying to de-escalate. So we don't want to agitate people further, right? If somebody's yelling for us to get away, okay, right? And avoiding using violence. We never want to intervene by like slapping somebody or pushing them away, right? That's not going to help de-escalate the situation either. And again, refraining from antagonizing. So this kind of goes back to number 1, like treating them as a friend, not accusing them, not saying, hey, you did this, right? Noticing our volume of our voice, right? Sometimes when we're like yelling at people, that's not going to invoke like a strong reaction for them to want to help us, right? And asking for help from others, right? You don't have to be the only rescuer, right? Or the only hero. Maybe it's calling for help. Maybe it's saying who else is around. Like, hey, can you help, right? Like bringing some other people around. The more people that are around, the more help we can provide, right? And knowing when to call for professional assistance, right? And this one is we have to keep in mind the identity of who needs help, right? So I know in lots of situations, the police are not the most appropriate people to call, and we've seen that in the most recent months, right? And so, typically on DePaul campus, we recommend calling for public safety first, right? if it's a mental health crisis, calling UCS, you know, so thinking a little bit about your safety, but also the safety of the person that you're rescuing. We don't want to put them in more danger, right? Laquan notice, put in the chat, being honest and direct is extremely important in the context of engaging others as if they were friends. Don't beat around the bush and overcomplicate it in our heads. Yes, I love that, definitely. Like, this is not the time to like chat it out or like, like we want to get them the help ASAP. No, that was great. Chrissy, did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say also just for the 5th tip of like noticing your body language, because that, like, if you're open, if your body shows that you're open, then that can, you know, allow that person to feel supported. And then I think it's also important to, if you can, it depends on the situation, but know your resources. So we may not be on DePaul's campus, but where you are at this moment, understanding where your resources lie. So if it's outside of your home, there's a situation, you know who to call. But if not, hopefully there is someone to call that you know.
Yeah. Thanks, Christine. Yeah, and that's why it's always great to like put public safety, put like the mental health crisis line, put the suicide line, like put all these numbers in your phone, right? We typically have our phone, right? And similar to what Christine's saying, noticing like spatial, right? Like we don't want to get too close, right? Because that could, somebody could feel more at danger, right? Or, you know, sometimes people like touch, sometimes people don't touch. So like if you're trying to comfort somebody, ask them like, can I touch you? Can I pat you, right? Asking them what they want. Yep. Rebecca, thank you again for highlighting that. Yep. Just wanted to note that calling the police may not always feel safe, particularly if the perpetrator is white and the targeted person is a person of color. How can we mitigate this? Yes, Rebecca. Yeah. So, you know, we said on DePaul campus, you know, we always recommend calling public safety. I would ask, you know, if you need to call UCS, ask for somebody that is CIT trained. Say, I'm having, you know, I have somebody here that has, you know, particularly a mental health concern. Can I make sure to get an officer that is, so what CIT is crisis intervention trained. And so they're a group of folks that are trained similar to mental health first aid, but knowing how to help in particular in a mental health situation. And I think always like even letting like the paramedics or the operator know like, hey, this is the situation, this is their identity, I'm really concerned about this, this and this, right? So when we let other people know like their safety, their identity is at harm, but I need to get them to the help that they really need, right? And sometimes like what's like the first chain of command, right? Before we can call the police. So kind of going through that as well. Laquan put, also in the moment, it means approaching the situation with a degree of falling forward, knowing you will make mistakes in your attempt to support, and that's human and that's okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, right? And that's why it's so important to like, when you can, ask the person, like, what do you need? How can I help you, right? And doing the best we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also would like to add the slide before this, the 5 steps. It takes like 3 seconds, and that's what's like sometimes it's hard. So like explaining the steps, you're like, oh, it's so nice and flushed out, but honestly it takes 5 seconds. So thank you for that comment, because it's true. There are times where we wish that we could have you know, intervened, but I use those times where I could have intervened to motivate the next time that happens, and sometimes practice if that were to happen. So thank you for that.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to move on because I know we're coming up on some time, but we have a few discussion points too.
Yes, so these are some scenarios that we first just want you guys to reflect on, right? Because we're thinking about how our identities and how they can hinder or motivate us to intervene. So just think about this. So let's say you see a stray dog in your neighborhood, and it's on the rooftop, and it looks like it might jump. What would you do? So I'm going to read them all, and then if I can just have one person maybe respond in the chat, just for the sake of time. The next one, you see a group of female-identified Caucasian students snickering and laughing at another female-identified Muslim student in public. The female-identified Muslim students start crying as the group walks away. Do you do anything? You witness 2 male-identified Black folks yelling loudly at one another in the middle of the sidewalk. They start yelling slur words and one hits the other. What do you do? Your male Hispanic friend tells you that they were raped last night and are unsure about where to get help. You are the first person that they told this to. How do you respond? Take a moment and write down in the chat how you would respond. And if you can, just let me know if it's the first, second, third, or fourth scenario. Thank you for raising your hand. You could feel free to unmute yourself. Sorry, Laquan, I didn't say the name.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome. I'm gonna go with the last one. A male Hispanic friend tells me that they were raped last night and they're unsure where to get help. And I'm aware that I'm the first person and I don't know how to respond. So, or how should I respond? So my first reaction would be to take a step back in the moment. If it's like I can obviously tell that the person is in distress. My first thing would be like thanking them for being vulnerable with me. I know it's not like easy, but also like trying to triage what they need in the moment before I get to like the long term of like, you don't know what resources you need. So my next thing would just be asking leading questions, open-ended questions, and figuring out like what support he has, like what he wants to do moving forward, what he feels comfortable doing moving forward, and then I would understand like from there I could offer to go with him to those resources. But yeah, I also just don't want to hop into like remedying it because he might not be at that stage of processing.
Wow, thank you so much, Laquan, for sharing. And I really liked your approach because it's first just important to thank someone for being vulnerable, because it takes courage to share something like any type of violence or sexual relationship violence. And so you said to first say thank you, and then you said open-ended questions. That's another great point because it allows room for autonomy. You're giving that person agency because when it comes to any type of violence, that is when someone's power is being taken away. And so you providing open-ended questions allows you to give that person their power back of, wow, I have the agency to answer this question and talk about what I need, talk about the support that, in this case, your friend needs. And then you said you would just end with offering support and walking them, or that is just also another great way to just end it, because sometimes, you know, we may have friends or individuals that we may know where they're like, I don't want to do this alone. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you, Laquan. And you did like the best thing first that you can possibly do in this situation, because for most survivors, when they disclose, it's really important that they feel validated and empowered, and that somebody isn't questioning what happened to them. And in a lot of situations, especially when you're the first person they've ever told this to, that's going to dictate pretty much everything in the next 48 hours, but then for the rest of their life, because this is something that really stays with you. And and changes you, right? Changes the way you act, the way you think, the way you interact with people. And to have somebody that first, when you disclose, says, I believe you, how can I help you? That's the most powerful and definitely what we want to do first and foremost. So thank you so much. And then I know, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say thank you both.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Luis wrote that they would support and search the necessary law enforcement and emotional health services for my friend. I think that's really great because, right, like a lot of the times, like we need that help and just like figuring out what is the closest place, the place that takes our insurance, an available place, like all of those are barriers, right? And just for all of our DePaul folks, we do offer survivor support advocacy, which means that you can point them in the direction of health promotion and wellness. And myself and both of my professional staff colleagues are trained and we provide confidential support. But what's great is that they don't have to make a decision. So if they'd like to report, if they would like to investigate, if they would like to, move forward with a rape kit, any and all of that we can help them with, and we're about providing them the support and care they need. And it's not about us, it's about their decision. So whatever decision that they want, we help them figure that out. So thank you. And thank you for choosing the most difficult scenario on this page. In terms of time, do we want to move forward with some of the skills and strategies, Christine?
Yep. So yeah, thank you all for participating. So getting into skills and strategies. So I have the 5 Ds, which are my favorite because they're easy to remember. And we're going to go through each one specifically. So it's distract, delegate, document, delay, and direct. So going into the first 2, distract. So this is an indirect approach to de-escalate a situation. So this is where you're basically shifting the attention on something else. So in this example, you see that 2 people are arguing on the train and the active bystander is saying, excuse me, do you know where the next stop is? So that is a great way to do that. I've also heard stories where you could actually be the center of attention by dancing. Just out of nowhere, right? Just distracting. And then the next one, delegate. So this is where you are getting help from someone else that you may feel has more authority or maybe has equipped skills that you may not have, depending on the situation. But here you see that there's a grocery store and we see 2 people arguing and the person is saying, or the active bystander is saying, can someone please help? This person's being harassed. So that is delegate. The next one is document. So, and you guys we can use these skills online and in public, right? So this is a public situation, but document, this is where you document what's going on, whether that's through video, screenshots, pictures. But the important thing about the document skill is that it's important to face the attention on the person that's being targeted. So this is supporting the person, the victim in this case. So first, after you document, whether it's a fight or whether it's pictures, it's important to always ask the person being targeted what they want to do with the footage, right? So we're here to support the victim. And so we give them permission, or they give us permission on what to do with it. Please refrain from posting it online or using it without their permission. And so whether this is a fight, you could, like I said, use a video, but here are some other tips. So keep a safe distance. Of course, during COVID, we definitely want to use that tip. Say the day and time. You can even explain what's going on if it's hard to see. Again, it's about supporting the victim. Then we have delay, where this is where after the incident is over, you delay your intervention by checking in. So it can be you saying, hey, is everything okay? How can I support you? What do you need? Can I sit with you? So this is basically after the incident is where you intervene. And then the last one, direct. Sorry, that was a typo, but direct. This is kind of like confrontation, where we first want you to assess your safety, right? And then you speak up about the harassment. And this is where you can be direct and clear and firm, saying things like, hey, that's inappropriate, leave them alone. Or you can even ask the person, ask the victim, hey, are you okay? Do you need help? Should we get out of here? This is definitely where you confront. And this is a skill that I am not great on. So hopefully with these 5 Ds, you know, you could use a combination, you could use 1 or 2, but we all have our different styles. And that's why we also have another tip, or not tip, but skill that Katrina will talk about in the next slide.
Thanks, Christine. And so this is called the Algae Action Plan. So this is actually from the National Certification Program Mental Health First Aid that I teach. So if you are interested, you can certainly go on DHub and find workshops. I have a few coming up. And then the model that Christine just shared with you, we use in our workshop called the Vini-Vow. So you can also sign up to take the Vini-Vow for next quarter as well. But the Algae Action Plan is very specific for mental health, so I'll use a mental health example, but it really is it's not a linear model because we never know like where somebody is in the process of getting help and getting them resources and support. But we like to start at A. So anytime we're approaching a situation, considering helping somebody, we're assessing, we're saying, are they at risk to themselves? Are they at risk to somebody else? And what's the safety risk for me, right? And so we're doing that when we're first on the scene, but we're also doing that as we're talking with them and providing them help. So we're always assessing and figuring out what they need and how we can get them the appropriate help. And then the next one is listening non-judgmentally. And so particularly in a mental health situation, we want to make sure that we're providing them room to speak and to kind of voice their needs and say what's going on for them. And this can, you know, listening non-judgmentally sounds like, you know, it's like, we're like, yeah, definitely, right? But sometimes this can be difficult, right? If we're kind of running off, we don't have the time, maybe we're not quite sure what's going on, maybe we're distracted by other things, right? And so we want to make sure that we're actively listening to somebody, and that can look like, right, like nodding your head, asking them follow-up questions, asking them, oh, well, this is what I'm hearing. Is this what you mean? You know, clarifying. And then we want to move on to giving reassurance and information. So we never want to say, hey, we're going to fix the problem, but we want to say, you know, thank you for sharing with me. Let's sounds like you might be interested in seeking therapy or interested in seeking this other community resource. How can I help you? Can I write that down for you? Can I walk you there? You know, how can we get you that help? And then encouraging appropriate professional help. So there's lots of support we can offer somebody, right? And one thing that we really like to highlight in mental health first aid is, you know, self-care. But we want to make sure that we're highlighting if they really need a therapist, if they need, you know, a physician, right? If they need a peer specialist or somebody. So there's lots of professionals that we can refer folks to, and why not all of them, right? I have lots of students that do therapy with somebody else and they do wellness coaching with me, and you know, it's such a great complement to be getting the help and the resources from a variety of support systems. And then the last one is encouraging self-help and other support strategies. So this is really around that self-care piece, but also around your social network. So who are the people in your life that are there to help you and provide support, whether that's family, that's friends, partners, you know, people at DePaul, right, professional staff. So this is a really great model, and I don't want to go into too much detail because I know we don't have enough time, but I also want you to take mental health first aid. So this is kind of a nice overview, but I think both of these models provide different angles to think about how to intervene and reminding us what kind of supports we would need. So does anybody have a question about either of these? I know we're going through these fairly quickly. So please feel free to type in some questions if you have some questions. But we do want to make time to just unpack a scenario. We have three, but for time's sake, we'll review one. So we'll do this one. So you are at the grocery store in the checkout line. You notice stranger A is making stranger B uncomfortable by standing less than 6 feet away, asking for their number, asking to go out on a date with them. But you notice that stranger B is trying to back away from stranger A. You can tell they're just not, they're not interested, right? Do you do anything? And so keep in mind some of the barriers we talked about, even, you know, as we think about being in a pandemic and how it feels to like intervene and get closer to somebody and try to help them, right? You know, would it feel a little bit differently if we weren't in a pandemic? Would it depend on their identities, right? So feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat. Nobody has thoughts on this one? Laquan, thanks for raising your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to give the group a minute to process, but I think this particular scenario just screams tons of different solutions that could come to mind. But like if I am going to be objective, it's like in the moment, am I comfortable stepping in and like asking the person who seems to be harassed, like, am I comfortable asking them, do they need support or do they need assistance? And if I'm not, like, we're in a public place and I can almost just be like I can let a manager know if I determine it's like something that is definitely an issue, but it's like, hey, this guy is harassing this other person and this is like their domain, and they have more, I would say they have more of a credibility or power to step in and support in that case. But I think in this particular scenario, it's like there can be a number of different solutions, but I want to figure out like, is my approach going to escalate it? And if so, like, is there another way I can do, or like, is there another way I can circumvent that?
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And yeah, there's a number of avenues we could go with this one. And I like that you thought about like just, you know, getting somebody else involved, like who has higher authority in the grocery store, right? Rebecca put in the chat, I would like to try to interrupt and distract. If that doesn't work, I'd likely say, oops, let's remember to socially distance. Next, I'd more directly tell A that it looks like they are making B uncomfortable. Yeah, those are great, Rebecca. Adding a little humor, right? Excuse me, aren't we supposed to be distant? You're not 6 feet. And may jump in with a distraction, like commenting on one of something in the cart, like chocolate. No, that's kind of what I thought of at first. Just doing a little distracting, but then keeping in mind, like, you know, if stranger A continues, right? Like maybe that might be the point where we'd want to escalate, because, you know, we can help in the grocery store, but what happens if they follow the person afterwards, right? We want to make sure that they're safe. Mabel said, maybe approaching stranger B and acting as if you know them as a friend by saying, hi, how have you been? I love that, Mabel. I love that. And even saying, hey, can you help me find like this item over here? You know, maybe like just getting on a line and like moving away.
Mm-hmm. Or if they're like, oh, you dropped something, like, and made them look, you know?
Yeah, no, these are great.
Oh, Laquan said that he at even just standing there and staring can work. Yeah, some people don't like to be stared down at, so a great way to distract.
It sure can. Thank you, everyone.
All right, so getting close to the end. So the importance of being an active bystander, right? This contributes to a lot of things, right? The Take Care DePaul culture that we continue to strive to create at DePaul University, and even in the DePaul community. This also relates to racial and social justice and even public health, right? Because in the end, we're able to take care of one another and work together. And if we all use these skills in all these different spaces, we'll be creating literally a Take Care DePaul culture, but in your community, right? And this just adds to just change, great change. And as Louise has said before, encourage one another, and may your mutual good examples speak louder than any words can. So we at HPW always believe that our actions can say louder, can speak louder than our words. And we hope that you guys can use these skills and actively just make change together.
Thanks, Christine. And so our last slide, if you can take a moment to take out your phone, maybe open up a browser and complete our evaluation. So this is actually the first time that we've combined both of these models, and we would truly love and appreciate your feedback. It's a quick survey, probably takes you about like maybe 5 to 7 minutes. We would really, really appreciate that. So any insight and feedback. And so just thank you so much for joining us today. And if you have any questions, feel free. The next slide includes some of our contact information, but yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for putting that in the chat, Emily.
Absolutely, happy to. So just in case any of you need it, if it's easier, I dropped that URL into the chat, so you can grab it there, so you can go ahead and give them their feedback. And we do still have some time, about 5 more minutes for more questions. So I want to encourage everyone to take a second. A lot to unpack here, a lot of good stuff. Fantastic job, Katrina and Christine. Really, thank you so much for presenting. So lots of stuff to think about. If you have questions, thoughts, please put them in the chat now and we can discuss those, or if you'd like to unmute yourself. In the meantime, do you mind if I ask a quick question while people are thinking about what they want to?
Of course.
So I think your slide on online harassment is really sobering. And certainly something that exactly, Laquan, we're on the same resources for harassment online, exactly what I was thinking. So I'm curious, yes, what resources would look like, and then what maybe, how you might adjust your approach as a bystander for that, because that's, you know, certainly there'll be things where you know someone online, it'll be similar to in person, but how would you adjust that for an online harassment case?
Yeah, so we talk for the Vini-Val that we provide at HPW. I talk a lot about online harassment, and using these skills, the 5Ds, is definitely something that you could use in an online space. But to first answer the resources, I do encourage for there's trainings for like how to be an active bystander online by Hollaback, which are the organization that provided the 5Ds. They provide so many free trainings, and if you can, I'll put the website of where you can reach out to them. And then I'll just give it like an example of how you can be a active bystander online. So let's say you see maybe like a tweet or a Facebook, and you see that someone they're being microaggressed, meaning like let me get an easier example. Maybe two people are arguing on Twitter or on Facebook, and as an active bystander, you can either delegate by reporting to Twitter or to Facebook and say, like, reporting that incident. And I know you can say specific things. So that's kind of like using the delegate tool. Or you can distract by putting a funny meme that has nothing to do with the situation, but it distracts what's really going on. Or you can be direct, and you can either DM that person or message that person and say, hey, that wasn't really nice for you to say. Or you can comment and be direct and say, hey, to the victim, hey, how can I support you? I noticed that is going on. And so you can use these tools just in an online space, and definitely encourage you guys to really reflect that and say, how would I help someone? And even using the Algae plan, you definitely can use that in an online space. It just will look differently.
Yeah, and I think, we've seen a lot of harassment online, right? And I think that's kind of where like the clapping back comes back sometimes, right? Because it's not okay, right? And so like Christine shared, there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. And, being online, it's a lot harder to be mean when we're up close, right? So like, direct messaging them and saying, hey, like this isn't okay, right? And I guess it's depending on your culture, on how you want to educate, if you want to educate them, but also like how it affects you too. Because I know a certain topic or situation might like hit me like, oh, that's really personal, and I don't want to respond to you. Like I'm just not no, right? But then another situation I might be like, oh yeah, I think I can do some like re-educating or whatever, right? So I think thinking about, how it aligns with you personally too.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I know Hollaback is a great organization. I know they started as something very, very specific, and they've really expanded out to so much engagement, which is fantastic. So great. I also just wanted to real quick, if anyone has any more questions, again, we still have about 2 more minutes, so we can sneak one in if you have one. But I know a lot of our audience, some of our audience is directly engaged with DePaul, and some of our audience is here as just part of the larger Chicago public health community. So certainly Hollaback, anything else for people who are maybe not as directly engaged with DePaul that you would, I know Katrina, you're talking about your mental health first aid training, which sounds fantastic. Any other resources you want to direct people to who may not be as engaged with the DePaul community specifically?
Yeah, so you can also go directly on Mental Health First Aid's website, and you can find trainings within our region too that aren't just like led by me for DePaul. So yeah, it's a public training, and some offer a cost, some don't. So kind of you can take a look, and they also offer specific trainings for youth and then for adult as well. They even have specific ones for EMTs and health professionals as well. I'd also direct people to Hope for the Day. They are one of our really strong community partners that provides a ton of education, awareness, connection to resources. They're doing some really great things within our greater Chicago community, but also nationally as well. I'd really check them out. They have a great like search area for if you're helping folks like find mental health therapy, if you're looking for like housing insecurity, food, et cetera, et cetera. One Love Foundation, I think, is really great for talking about education and healthy relationship consent as well. Christine, do you have other ones you wanted to add?
Nope, those are all really great. And I'm just dropping them in the chat.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you, Christine. And those are, I know people were asking too about alternate resources rather than calling 911 immediately. And those
Yeah.
would all be great options for that. So I think we're at time, which is wonderful. I just want to take a second again and say, Katrina and Christine, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Lots of good resources. I really enjoyed your presentation. So thank you. We really appreciate it. We're lucky to have such great presenters for this. I am going to switch back to my screen if I'm able to do it. Let's see. Let's see if I can. Here we go. Okay, great. So you have the evaluation for them in the chat. We are going to conclude. So we're at 10:56 actually right now. So we're just a little bit past. At 11:05, we'll be starting our new breakout session on podcasting, which is pretty exciting. I am going to go ahead and dump all of you out of this. So feel free, you can go back and take a look at what else is available, try out a different track. Of course, I'm pretty excited about this one if you want to stay here and come back and join us. But thank you again so much for taking time, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Take care.